So we're here in your ghost resort.
Yep.
And another thing that runs through your work a lot is the idea of ruins, and ghost resort obviously seems like a resort that's fallen into ruins.
Yeah. Well, it definitely is. I mean, like the idea for the show came from a resort in Taiwan called Sanchi. I think that's how you pronounce it, which was built and never used because I think so many workers died constructing it that the population that was potentially going to use it were too superstitious to, and so it was never used. But it's now sitting there as this very sort of unusual architectural.
Yeah, it's a fantastic space age sort of building. Isn't it?
And it's now a destination. So people go along to see Sanchi, the abandoned, the never used.
So it's being reclaimed by nature, is it?
Yeah, it is. It's being like completely overgrown by the native vegetation, and they're basically rusting hulks. All the pools are still there, the water slides, etc. Yeah. So it's kind of like it's like an anti-Disneyland in a way, but it's sort of like the nostalgia and the melancholy of the modernist ruin is something that I've become more and more interested in, and it's definitely like in the last couple of years.
You've had a lot of graffiti-covered buildings and buildings cracking or exploding.
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, they're sort of in a state of being disassembled or reassembled. I was interested in them being in between. Like some of them were definitely exploding, but I was sort of becoming. I was interested in the idea of architecture under threat post September 11, 2001. So it's like since then there's been this sort of paranoia surrounding the idea of structures and architecture. After the Trade Centre coming down, and it just seemed like in the mass media that usually quite often when architecture was featured, it was under threat. It was sort of like it was being blown up by, some sort of, insurgency or, terrorist activity. Or, it was being surveilled. It was, do you know what I mean? It was, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I think the kind of pessimistic view of that is countered by the nature reclaiming the buildings that's in a lot of your paintings. That's kind of optimistic idea that life continues, I suppose.
Yeah, well, always.
It's not very human. It's not very kind of friendly to humans, I guess. The idea that it's being claimed by, we're not necessary for life to continue, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I guess there's something, sort of culturally speaking, there's architecture is such a force in a way, in terms of its overarching ideas and systems and programs and just, structures.
Yeah.
But, it's sort of like that whole nature culture, like the tension between nature and culture that I like to sort of push through my work. Ultimately, it's sort of like the forces of the natural world sort of eventually take over, those of culture, and whatever cultures they might be.
And you're not the first painter to do this. There's quite a tradition.
Well, we could go back to Caspar David Friedrich,
or to Claude Lorraine. I was thinking, go back even further.
Yeah.
He did all those neoclassical ruins. It was the future of his time.
Yeah.
Where nature was reclaiming. There were vines climbing over all the columns.
Mm-hmm.
John Martin did a similar sort of thing.
Yeah, really mad ones.
Yeah. So it's something, some kind of subconscious fear or something. That we all have, isn't it?
I think fear is probably not the word. I don't know. It's like it's this nostalgia or melancholy for a future lost or something. It's sort of like say with the work that I'm doing. It's like I wasn't around for the modernist promise, the utopian. The promise of utopia, that distant but radiant utopia. It wasn't part of my upbringing. I always had the residue of it, and was aware of it through studying art history and etc. But it's kind of like a borrowed nostalgia. in a way.
Or nostalgia is perhaps the best. I mean, nostalgia for the future is possibly impossible.
Yeah. Well, what about like the nostalgia for yesterday's future?
Yeah.
You know, that's more of the point. So it's like there's all this like weird things happening with like time and history.
I'm really seeing your work through these screens as well of cinema, and before that painting.
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah.
It's that sort of view of the ruin rather than actual ruins, isn't it? The
Yeah.
psychological.
Yeah,
ruins.
it's the psychological ruin. Yeah,
And that's what connects to these faces that you've done.
well, yeah. I mean, like they, you know, it's sort of like the renovated faces, or like one is sort of ruined. You know, it's sort of like they're not like there is that celebrity aspect to them, and that whole idea of excess, which you know is another aspect of my work. The idea of completely excessive, you know, the super abundant, the hyper real, whatever. But you know, one of these faces is a soldier. You know, so it's sort of like he had a high gauge bullet pass through his face in Iraq and completely destroyed it, you know, and his story of survival was so remarkable. You know, I think he kept breathing by holding his thumb on his palate so that he could open his airway and make it back to base and get medical attention, and eventually, you know, he survived, made his way back to, you know, the UK and became a minor celebrity. That story of survival, you know, the tabloids got hold of it. But I mean, like, you know, so science, technology, etc. I mean, like that's, you know, really benefited somebody in an incredibly powerful way. And then, you know, it's sort of like there's other uses for that as well.
They're tough paintings too. I mean, that one's tough painting to look at. I imagine it'd be a tough painting to hang on your wall in your house.
Yeah.
every
Well,
day.
sort of. I wanted it to be, you know, to both repel and attract with a similar force. You know, so I wanted to paint it in a way which was so, you know, which was quite sumptuous and sensuous. Yet, obviously, the subject and the impact of that figure is sort of, you know, repelling. You know, it's like the pain in that, is kind of hard to take.
Well, your other paintings are very seductive, and so these do punctuate the show. These other paintings. I mean, that's obviously slightly disturbing. A guy with scaffolding around his head and through his head. Yeah,
but that's the whole idea, you know, of the relationship to the architectural work. It's head scaffold, you know, it's head architecture. You know, that was the initial idea. I mean, I saw some kid walking through the park near the studio in Paran, and he was like about a 17-year-old, 6'5" guy with a halo head brace, you know, pins and everything like that. And I mean, I was so like attracted and repulsed. It just looked so incredible. Just like, oh shit, you know, like the pain.
Yeah.
You know, but
you look at it and you react kind of symptomatically. It's like a horror movie.
Yeah. But there's always that attraction there, isn't there?
Where you can't stop.
You can't look away. Yeah. So, I mean, if I'd have had a camera, I would have asked to photograph him, but I didn't. And so I found something online that approximated what I'd just seen, like immediately, just got back to the studio. Because I was just like, bang, all right, this is a way of reintroducing the figure into my body of work, not directly within an architectural space, but I just...
But within the framework that you'd built up.
Yeah. And that started it. So I've called it Headcase. I called it Headcase Study 1, which was kind of like a play on the Case Study House project in Los Angeles. And the idea of the head case, you know, that sort of, or you man kind of thing. So, yeah, and that's where it began. So I think that, you know...
And then you have Mickey Rourke and... well, actually, Mickey Rourke damaged his face from boxing, didn't he?
Exactly. You know, so it's not that simple, is it? It's not like some sort of, you know, I've got too much money and I'm incredibly vain and I just want to, you know, I want to look beautiful. It's sort of like, it was it's a survival mechanism for somebody like him. You know, it's like he did have his face damaged boxing and then he got back into acting, and it's like, well, you know, in Hollywood, it's like looks are everything. Yeah. But it's quite a, like the distortion involved is quite amazing.
Oh, it's a Batman villain.
Yes, yeah, it's quite, but it's, in a way, it's acceptable within within a particular frame. And I totally understand why, if you're in that industry, you'd do that. You know, it's like sink or swim. It's like survival. So it's sort of like these procedures are sort of like evolutionary in a way, and it's sort of like the artificiality of like the architectural spaces that have been part of my work for a long time sort of seem to necessitate some sort of bodily evolution to handle them.
Right.
And that was sort of part of the idea with the portraits. Yeah,
are these the residents?
Possibly.
Possibly.
I don't want to say they're anything in particular, because I just want them to work as these tense keys within the show. You know, these sort of like formal kind of pops. Like, what the hell? You know, it's sort of like, well, do they exist in these spaces? Like, have they been affected by the architecture? Has the architecture sort of abused them in a way? Has it created them? There's that symbiotic sort of relationship going on there, or are they evolving to handle the synthetic nature of the way in which I use architectural space?
Sure. Or just coping with age, the same way a building does.
Yeah. Yep. They're renovating themselves. They're going to live forever. They're going to be beautiful forever.
Well, if structural materials are going to keep on lasting, and if bodies are going to keep on getting older and older, they'll be necessarily freaks.
Yeah. And I just think it's interesting how like sort of plastic surgery seems to have come out of art history. It's like this whole idea of remaking yourself. You know, it's like sculpting and changing and remodeling and all that sort of thing. You know, it's sort of like, can you tweak my nose just a bit? You know, it's sort of like all these adjustments that are happening surgically. I mean, like that's how artists and particularly painters like adjust and readjust. And
Bernini would be a surgeon, a cosmetic surgeon today.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Indeed.
You know, there's always relationships between art and science as well. You know, so yeah, it's like that's sort of how I see them as very connected.
Yeah, they are, and they're an unusual and surprising connection too, I think, which is always good to see in the show.
Cool, yeah. Better than not. These are completely disconnected. What are they doing here? What the hell?
It's good to force the viewer to ask that question.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of people are trying to figure out what the connection is. They can't see it, and then some people just totally get it, and that's fine. That's fine, and it's, you know, apart from anything, it's been amazing for me to, you know, sort of
push paint in new directions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's just amazing how, you know, it's like how painting distorts things, whether you like it or not. I mean, sort of realism is impossible. You know, I just think by the very nature of painting something, it's always about distortion. And I mean, I think that, you know, with the architectural work, you know, in the past, I've kind of like pushed that idea of distortion. With the portraits, no, and it was just happening anyway. You're thinking, well, that's one of the powerful aspects of painting.